Hello, I'm Robert Betteridge. I work in rare books and music collections at the National Library of Scotland. It was during a St Andrew's Day dinner in 1913 that John Gribble, an American businessman, announced his intention to gift to the people of Scotland these manuscripts containing over 50 poems and 27 of the poet's letters. In June 1788, Robert Burns took up the lease of the farm of Ellisland in Dumfriesshire. In the previous 2 years he had found fame and critical acclaim with his poetry, been welcomed into polite Edinburgh society, undertaken tours of Highland and Lowland Scotland, and begun to contribute songs to the Scots Musical Museum. However, Burns had to settle down to earning a living again and hoped that a return to farming would be successful enough to allow him some time to work on his poetry and song. In addition, he sought a position with the excise as a more reliable way to provide a regular income for his family. Burns's close neighbour at Ellisland was Robert Riddell of Glenriddell, who lived at the house of Friars Carse, spending his time on antiquarian and literary pursuits. Burns struck up a friendship with Riddell, and latterly with his younger brother Walter and his wife Maria. Despite their position among the landed gentry, the Riddells appreciated the company of the tenant farmer Burns and his literary talents. In the spirit of their friendship, Robert Riddell presented the poet with 2 blank, leather-bound volumes for Burns to fill and return to Riddell. Into one volume Burns inscribed some of his unpublished poetry, and into the other, examples of letters he had written. The second volume, containing the letters, was never presented because in December 1793 the Riddells severed their ties with Burns due to an unfortunate incident which has never been fully understood, other than that a drunken Burns, who may have been the object of a prank, overstepped the bounds of propriety with Maria Riddell. Robert Riddell died in 1794, and Burns requested the Riddells to destroy or return the volume of poetry, which contained verses that could harm his reputation if circulated elsewhere. Fortunately, it was returned to him and was reunited with its companion volume at Burns's home in Dumfries. When Robert Burns died on the 21st of July 1796, the Glenriddell Manuscripts, as they became known, were left with his widow Jean. She passed them, along with other material, to Dr. James Curry, who was preparing a critical edition of Burns's works to raise funds for the support of the poet's family. Curry, a Dumfriesshire native living in Liverpool, met Burns only once, but had connections with Burns's circle of friends who were able to assist him with the work. Though there is no evidence it was ever asked for, none of the material given to Curry was returned to the Burns family after he had finished with it. The Glenriddell manuscript stayed in the possession of the Curry family until December 1853, when the widow of Dr. Curry's son quietly presented the 2 volumes to the Liverpool Athenaeum. Nothing is heard of the manuscripts until 1874, when Henry A. Bright wrote an account of them and put them on display at the Athenaeum. Subsequently, in 1913, as a fundraising exercise, the Liverpool Athenaeum decided to sell the manuscripts to the auctioneer Sotheby for £5,000. When this became public, there was an outcry in the Scottish press, and efforts were made to prevent the sale. Questions were raised over whether the Liverpool Athenaeum had any right to sell the manuscripts, whether Burns' descendants had any claim to ownership, and the threat of their loss to the nation by export abroad. Speeches were made, lawyers volunteered their services on behalf of the Burns family, who appeared to seek no financial gain from the manuscript's return, and high-ranking figures including the Earl of Rosebery became involved. The manuscripts were bought by the bookseller J.W. Hornstein, who arranged for their sale to an American client. However, when negotiations began to bring them to Scotland, Hornstein valiantly attempted to recall the manuscripts from America, but died that same week. Nonetheless, the manuscripts were destined to return to Scotland, having been purchased by John Gribble, who gifted them to the Scottish people under a deed of gift that protected them from ever being sold again. Gribble's deed of trust indicated that the manuscripts were to be kept in the joint custody of the corporations of Edinburgh and Glasgow until such time as a National Library of Scotland came into being. With the foundation of the National Library, the Glenriddell manuscripts could now take up their permanent residence as part of the library's collections, and to this day they remain one of its greatest treasures. As the poet himself selected the poems and letters, the manuscripts are an exceptional resource for the study of Burns. Their story after his death is no less fascinating, particularly the passions that were raised by the threat of the manuscripts lost to the nation, the pride of Scotland in her national bard, and the selfless gift of John Gribble, We recognise the Glenriddell Manuscripts' importance to the people of Scotland and the significance of the establishment of a national library.